Good morning, everyone. I'm the director for a New Zealand NGO called Common Knowledge Trust, and we hold all of the Birthing Better childbirth preparation skills that were developed in the early 1970s with me and hundreds of dads and moms. So really the credit is to just ordinary human beings. They asked me to carry this forward, and I have, and I've put all of this into a not-for-profit charitable organization in New Zealand. Today is the third class of our COVID-19 free birth skills online class. And yes, in the description there is a link to the course, and we are selling it. That's how we get money to keep going. We've been a not-for-profit since 1996, and I had carried these skills in my head since the early 1970s. So understand that when you purchase the course, that the money that you pay goes for our not-for-profit. So today we're going to talk about breathing skills. Now, when I gave birth in 1970 in the United States, there was a very, very high societal expectation that all of us as pregnant families went to the very first childbirth preparation classes. They were mostly Lamaze classes that were taught at every hospital, and the Bradley method that some other families took and paid for separately. These were the very first concept that there were universal skills. However, there was also a downside to them. One of the downsides is that Lamaze and Bradley, and in New Zealand, Grantley Dick Reed, that was the first classes here, focused on skills for low-risk normal pregnancies and for low-risk births. So those three obstetricians who developed the first universal set of birth skills believed that if women who were low risk learned the breathing and relaxation skills, that they could have a natural birth, pain-free labor, without medical care. So that was one of the huge downfalls, because Lamaze was taught in every hospital, and all of us went and took these childbirth classes. But underneath, there was always this message: these skills do not work for you if you are medically high risk. And that seemed crazy. Why? Because 100% of pregnant women will give birth, and 100% of pregnant women are doing the activity of birthing their baby. And so it's important that we develop skills that anyone can use if they're birthing their baby to do the activity of birthing our baby. So there were some other downfalls about the Lamaze and Bradley method. And just remember, when any new set of skills develop, they always have glitches, or they're not quite right. They have to be refined. So the Lamaze breathing was something we couldn't sustain. You cannot your way through contractions for hours and hours. Bradley at least said breathe in your nose and out your mouth. But as you'll soon discover, that's just one of the four ways that humans breathe. And we can breathe in the nose, out the mouth, and sound very relaxed, or very focused, or we can moan, which indicates that we are not coping, or we can scream, which indicates we are not coping. So when you tell people in the nose and out the mouth, particularly for fathers, they can hear all four of those ways that we use in the nose, out the mouth as being fine, because it's in the nose and out the mouth. So when birthing better skills started to develop in the early 1970s, they developed because many families found the Lamaze and Bradley methods didn't work. Or they found that the skills, they tried using the skills and they couldn't adjust them. They weren't adaptable and they weren't sustainable. Also, these breathing skills at first, because it was so connected to an ideology about birth for low-risk women, that even if a woman who had a normal pregnancy and a normal birth ended up with more medical care, she'd stop using the skills because she felt she had failed to achieve this normal birth. And so if she had more medical care, then she stopped using the skills, or if she needed medical care, she didn't believe the skills were suited to her because the skills were linked to a philosophy. And in some ways, birthing better is linked to a philosophy. It's 100% of pregnant women will give birth, and every pregnant woman is doing the activity of birthing her baby. So therefore, we should all have skills that are adjustable, adaptable, and sustainable. So when we developed the breathing skills in Birthing Better, we developed them because at that point there was a 4.5% cesarean rate in the United States in 1970. Now I know people who are natural birth advocates go, see, 95% of women can labor and deliver. But you need to understand that the medical profession at that point was not very sophisticated at dealing with the risks. They knew they were there, but cesareans were major abdominal surgery and only done to save a woman's life. So the 95% of us who labored, we labored for hours or days and days and days. We suffered or we coped. We had good outcomes or we had terrible outcomes. And I've spoken about this before, so you can go back to the other classes. It was consumers that demanded the maternity model change and lower the risks. Doctors have not gone around with scalpels trying to cut women open, or they're so bored they want to go play golf. We wore bikinis, so we didn't want an ugly scar, so they created bikini cuts. We didn't want our twins or our breeches to be at risk, so they started delivering them by cesarean. We didn't want our babies hurt by forceps, so they started to do cesareans. And modern people don't like risks, so the medical profession responds to that. So we have to get a real grip about this. If we want to birth actively, we need to become skilled. And I talked about it in the last class, the verbs used for birth: giving birth, weak, having a baby, weak verb, doing the activity, doing, weak verb. But that's the reality. Labor is doing it. Having a cesarean is doing the activity of birthing our baby. So we can breathe through that activity. And why do we want to breathe through that activity? Because we'll breathe anyway. Because if labor or having a cesarean was just like I am sitting here now, we wouldn't need to have breathing skills. But anybody who's given birth knows that our breathing changes. Our breathing changes because we become excited, or we become anxious, or we feel discomfort, or people do things to us that are uncomfortable, or we feel pain, and our breathing changes. Besides which, we have all these hormones rushing around in our body that cause us to change how we're breathing. And so we, the mothers and fathers who worked with me, the hundreds of them who developed these skills, we focused on breathing first so that we could cope, manage, work through, deal with, handle, stay on top of, and feel in control. Because women used to suffer in childbirth, and suffering was not a term connected to a problem or bad outcome. It was connected to the fact that birth was so intense because we all labored that we suffered. You cannot determine how long your labor is going to be. If you have a short labor, it can be so intense you feel like you're going to die. If you have a long labor and it goes on and on and on and on and on, you just feel it's never going to stop. So suffering, if we could cut down suffering, we could go a long way to improving our experiences at birth, because there's no way to know what your birth is going to be like. So we have to continue to do the activity. So we had to start with how did we breathe? And because fathers and mothers alike develop these skills, you need to understand that what we learned was a simple truth. We are all one humanity. We all breathe, and we all do it the same way. We have 4 patterns of breathing. And if I pause for a moment and say to you, what are the breathing patterns? What are the 4 breathing patterns that all humans use? It may not come to mind right away. Often when I ask that, when I teach globally around the world, people will say, well, you can breathe in your chest, or you can breathe in your belly, or you can breathe fast or slow. Well, that's true, but those aren't patterns. The patterns are we breathe in and out our nose, in the nose, out our mouth, in our mouth, out our nose, and in and out our mouth. And you knew that, yet you couldn't articulate it. And when we can't articulate something very quickly, that means we can't use that lack of instantaneous knowledge to create skills. And that makes sense. So if we just take any breathing pattern, and I did at the beginning, so you already know this, in the nose, out the mouth, when do you actually use it? At the beginning of this, I showed you how it could sound like, but when do we breathe in the nose and out the mouth? We all use this. When do we use it? And if it doesn't come to your mind quickly, this is the second layer, that we cannot develop sustainable, adjustable skills if something doesn't come to mind instantaneously, because then we can't choose. So when do we use in the nose, out the mouth? Well, if you have blocked sinuses, you don't, because you're going to more likely use in the mouth, out the mouth. But if you use in the nose, out the mouth, when we exercise, we start going upstairs or run. And some people even count in and count out. When we have sex, yup. When we feel pain, ah. When we're moaning, yes, ah. When we're relaxing, or so that one human variation is used in different ways, with what sounds different each time we have a variation. Of those variations that both men and women do, which are the ones that you could use to stay in control and cope and deal? Well, it's fairly obvious. It's or, and which are the ones that indicate to yourself or to those listening to you that you're not coping? Well, somewhat obvious. Or, ah! Yes. So in the nose, out the mouth can sound to us as though we're coping and sound to us as though we're struggling. And that's the same for people who are with us. That gives fathers who are birth coaches an indication of when to help. And how does a father help? He models the good breathing. So if he hears a woman start to, oh, then he can just go, or, and if he gets close enough to her, she'll hear that. No woman wants to feel out of control when she's doing the activity of birthing her baby. For that moment, she was struggling to cope and stay on top of the sensation she was feeling or what was being done to or around her. And so when the birth coach, usually the father, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, he can model that breathing. And by modeling that breathing, that means that the woman will get her control back. And she does it for 2 reasons. One is she wants to get the control back, and the other is that she is deeply grateful that someone can see and hear that she was struggling for a moment and has helped her gain control. So as a couple, she knows, he knows, or she knows how to help, and that matters. So there's a thing about fathers. So let me talk about that. When I gave birth in 1970, both Lamaze and Bradley were very focused on couples working together. Bradley was called husband coach childbirth or father coach childbirth. Had asked the medical profession to let our husbands come in, and they bent. They did. So my husband was with me in 1970 when we birthed our daughter. We expected them to know how to help us because we lacked skills and we were sick of being left alone to discover birth for ourselves. We didn't know how to discover birth. We got through it. Birth happened to us. There was no way to know what it was going to be like. We had no control over it, just like we had no control over pregnancy. We had to learn to live with being pregnant, and we had to learn to work through birth. And so fathers came in and they were called a birth coach. The new natural birth advocates in the 70s and 80s, all the very famous ones, said, no, fathers shouldn't coach, shouldn't tell a woman, push, push, push. And they didn't believe that skills had been sufficiently effective for low-risk normal pregnancies to achieve those three narrow goals of a natural birth, pain-free labor with no medical care, because those goals were narrow and they were misguided. The goals originally should have been 100% of pregnant women give birth, 100% of pregnant women do the activity of birthing their baby, 100% of pregnant women should self-learn birth and birth coaching skills in pregnancy, and then use those skills to work through the activity of birthing their baby. If that message had been given when I gave birth in 1970, our generation would have effectively passed that message on to your mothers and fathers, and they would have passed it on to you. But that message got broken in the United States because the group of natural birth advocates were only focused on low-risk normal pregnancies and births that could occur outside of the medical profession. And so the vast majority of women have been left behind, and the oppositional approach to childbirth has been the rule of the day, which has led to the shame, blame, guilt, disappointment, anger, and frustration so many women feel today. So in the 70s, the natural birth advocates actively dismissed skills by saying cows and cats aren't taught to birth, women don't need to be taught to birth, but women aren't cows and cats. We, and men, have brains. They're called cortexes. And there is no human being in the world who does not thrive on being skilled. Think of our children. They have to learn to put their clothes on. It's not instinctive. Having sex, if we just go by instinct, nobody would learn to pleasure each other. For goodness sakes, if we just went on the instinct of being hungry, we'd have poisoned ourselves by eating things that aren't safe to eat. Birth is an activity like any other activity, except it's very infrequent and it's very dynamic and it's very life transforming. And we should elevate it to a very high level of skills, not the simplest skills, which Lamaze and Bradley were. And that's why Birthing Better developed. So we want fathers to be our coach. We don't want them just to support our choices. That's like if they stood behind us as we were changing a dirty diaper and they said, good girl, well done. We want them to learn how to change the dirty diaper. So we need to understand that since the 70s, the disruption of the family has occurred through the natural birth advocates. The person who's your best birth coach is the person who's going to continue with you and the baby after the birth. I was a solo mom and I had nobody come to the birth with me. That happens. That's because I was in a strange place and nobody I knew was there. But if I had been where there had been people who knew me, I would have chosen one person or more to be with me. The rise of doulas has been to replace fathers as birth coaches, and this isn't really acceptable. Really, when people want doulas is after the birth. They want somebody to help clean, cook, shop, take care of the kids, do the laundry. So postnatal doulas are wonderful. Men and others who love this woman and are going to be in the baby's life should be the primary birth coach and should be skilled because you have more time to work through the skills. So as we go back to the breathing, understand that when we started, we had to discover these 4 breathing patterns, and then we had to figure out how to use them. And as I've just said, with the in the nose, out the mouth, it's apparent when we are using that breathing pattern to relax and when we're using that breathing pattern to indicate we're not comfortable. In the nose and out the nose doesn't have as many variations, and people who have blocked noses find it challenging to breathe in and out the nose. However, in and out the nose is a very good breathing pattern for labor or discomfort when it is used to calm you. In fact, breathing in and out the nose has a biophysical component that is very powerful. When we are stressed, the sympathetic nervous system is activated. That's the fright, flight, fight, freeze. And that causes our blood pressure to rise and the capillaries that the blood flows through to constrict. We don't want that because our blood flow nourishes the placenta. So when we are terribly stressed, that impacts our baby. And it impacts us because we get frightened and we want to leave the situation. And when we're mouth breathing, that stimulates the sympathetic nervous system even more. When we breathe in and out of the nose, that stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is what calms us. It dilates the blood vessels. It lowers the blood pressure, and it opens up our lungs. So there is a type of breathing method called Buteyko, Buteyko, that is used for asthma and all sorts of breathing dysfunctions. And for athletes, there's Oxygen Advantage, which is a simulation of high altitude breath training. By breathing in and out of the nose, we become more relaxed. Now, the natural birth movement has said, in labor, oxytocin and endorphins flooded, and that is what women use to cope with pain. For any of us who have had painful labor, that sounds good, but my goodness, that may be biophysically happening to us, but it doesn't cut down the pain, honestly. Where it does cut down the pain is that we go into a numb state if we have very, very long labors. So often women who've had very, very long labors and think they're unbearable, if they labor another time and have very short labors, they find that short labors are more intense. So we need to learn to cope. This idea that this oxytocin and love hormone and endorphin is going to just be our natural pain relief. It has made us lazy and assuming that that's what's going to work. So having skills is what will help you cope. So in the nose and out the nose does work for many women because many women are very quiet in labor. They are quiet because they are very focused. Some women are quiet because in their religious beliefs, they are told that they should not make a peep. When I teach in very rural communities, I have learned over the past 50 years that there is no culture around the world that teaches breathing patterns in birth or relaxation for birth or how to create space in your pelvis. They have lots of pros and cons, do's and don'ts while you're pregnant and after the birth. But labor around the world for all of us as women has always been an unknown. The very concept that we can have skills is very, very new. And we need to cling to those skills, learn them, and pass them on, and encourage our sons and daughters to self-learn skills when they're pregnant and use them to birth their baby. So when do women use in the nose and out the nose? First of all, the variation is like this, or like this. And you can almost hear that. You can almost hear that if pain gets more intense, I'm more likely to respond by doing this. And as the pain lessens, I'm more likely to respond by doing this. So we've done in the nose and out the nose. We've done in the nose and out the mouth. So when do we breathe in the mouth and out the nose? A lot of people, this is not familiar to us. But if you've ever jumped into really cold water, that's what you do. It's a shock breathing. It sounds like this. And you won't hear it repeated over and over again. But if a woman, for instance, has something happen to her very suddenly in birth, somebody does something, causes discomfort, or if she's gone to sleep and woken up in an intense contraction, and she does this, then you know that's shock. But then she will move into either in the nose, out the mouth, in and out the nose, or in and out the mouth. So let's go to in and out the mouth. Ah, 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 ah. Well, for a lot of people, they go, is that sex or pain? In labor, it's pain. We hope that sex isn't painful. So in and out the mouth is often it is a stimulation of that sympathetic nervous system that is fright, flight, fight, and freeze. When we hear women in labor doing this, if you're the birth coach, dads, she is not coping. But she didn't get there instantaneously. You didn't hear the, oh, you didn't hear the, oh, you didn't hear the, oh. So that can have gone on for hours. And that's why it's so important for the birth coach to see and hear what a woman is looking like and sounding like and step in right away to help her. So now we have the 4 human patterns of breathing and their variations. The in the nose, out the nose, in the nose, out the mouth, in the mouth, out the nose, in and out the mouth. And we now know that some of those variations we can use to cope and manage, work through, deal with, handle, stay on top of, and feel in control. And those are very active verbs. If we cope, it is by intention. If we manage, it's by intention. If we deal with, handle, work with, stay in control, stay on top of, it is the intentional use of skills to deal with discomfort or things we don't like. Now, where does the discomfort in birth come from? Well, it can come emotionally because we can get very anxious and frightened. And that stimulates the sympathetic nervous system that makes us very edgy. And so breathing in and out of the nose that opens up the parasympathetic and calms us is a very good practice. And both pregnant women and their birth coach should use that if they feel anxious, or the father should help the mother use that, or the other person. We use the word father, but we are not fixated on father. We're fixated on the other person who's going to be in the baby's life. But we can't keep going, she or he, mother, sister, brother. Right, it goes crazy. Okay, so we just use the word father. And also, men have been reduced in this role, and we want to bring the role of the father or the other back up to be the primary birth coach, because they're going to be in the baby's lives. And if they have skills as human beings in pregnancy to prepare for birth and during the birth, then they will feel confident as a parent. And this has lifelong implications to families. We cannot have women unskilled to birth, and we can't have men unskilled to help at birth. This makes people unskilled in parenting. It makes them uncertain and lack of confidence. Humans thrive on being skilled. So with these 4 breathing patterns and knowing which ones calm us, then we can effectively use them to cope and deal, which are very active verbs. So women need to use them when they have sensations that are physical, that they're uncomfortable with, or anxieties or fears that they're uncomfortable with, or when others do things to or around them they're uncomfortable with. If I'm on my own, birthing on my own, will my breathing patterns vary? Of course they will. I have perhaps more control over my external environment, but perhaps not. Perhaps I'm birthing alone in the middle of a war, or birthing alone as I'm driving myself to the hospital, or I'm birthing alone because of some other bizarre circumstance besides choice. If I'm birthing alone by choice, then I've somehow made a decision to do that. But I still need good breathing patterns. So if I'm breathing where there are other people around, my expectation is they're going to help me, which means I expect them to see and hear when I need help. So if I can't maintain that calm breathing of either in the nose, out the nose, or in the nose, out the mouth, either or, which can then move to or, if I begin to sound like this, oh, then I want somebody to hear right away and come and model or model. I want them right away to help me deal and cope better. And there's an expectation. So we need to understand that when women birth alone, whether planned or not planned, whether in a wonderful environment or a crazy environment, women around the world are birthing in insane places. So the idea that we need to have a safe environment to birth is absolutely, I need to plug in my computer, so hold on a minute. So the idea that the natural birth movement said that we needed to have a safe environment to birth absolutely is an insane statement. There are women birthing in Syria. They birthed in Rwanda. They birthed in the tsunami. They birth around the world as abused women, as poor women who are living in famines. We don't need safety to birth. Birth will occur at the end of pregnancy. And when women are silent in birth, it doesn't mean they love it. They can hate it. So we need to understand that we can find breathing patterns, and that was Birthing Better Mothers and Fathers did. We found these 4 human breathing patterns: in the nose, out the nose, in the nose, out the mouth, in the mouth, out the nose, and in and out the mouth. And then we investigated when we used them. Then we found the breathing patterns that helped us to stay calm and feel in control. And because we worked together in our family, the other could hear when we weren't. And what did we do? We mimicked contractions. So Lamaze had us go home and use breathing, which was not effective, but it was the first. So we had to just love it because at least it gave us a plan. And our husbands were supposed to squeeze our leg really intensely so we could feel pain. And they'd squeeze it for a minute. That's how long an intense contraction lasts. And then give us 3 minutes break and then squeeze it again and do that for an hour. And then we had to breathe through that minute contraction. It's still a good plan. Do it with an Indian burn. Anything that causes you to feel pain, because labor can be very painful. And if you can go 1 minute contraction, 3 minutes, 1 minute for an hour, and you think, oh God, thank that God that's over. Well, imagine the 95% of women who labored when there was only a 4.5% cesarean rate in 1970 when I gave birth. There are many of us who labored for days. We can't get out of birth. So when we think, oh, an hour of pain I can cope with, well, imagine 12 hours. Imagine 15. How about 24? How about 36? How about 48 hours of labor contractions that keep going on? Don't you think that you would like some breathing skills and like to have somebody with us who can help us stay in control? Wouldn't you like somebody to help you? Well, you should, and you should learn the skills and get somebody to work through these skills with you. This is not rocket science. This is not stupid, and this does not go against the belief that childbirth and pregnancy are normal life events. It means that they are normal life events. What's the word normal mean? It means that it can hurt like a mother, and you should have skills to cope. It means that it may not hurt, and you didn't particularly need skills. But I can tell you from being at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of births, there are a tiny, 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 tiny number of women who don't feel pain in labor. The rest range from, oh, this is manageable, to I was going to die. I just can't believe it. And women are psychologically damaged when they lack control to do this activity. It is exhausting to parent when you are recovering from an exhausting, scary birth because you had no skills to cope. This is unnecessary because we need the childbirth trend, and we needed it back in the 70s to continue. It is essential we all become skilled. So from the early 70s to the 80s, when the cesarean rate was still low because it was major abdominal surgery and the medical profession didn't have the skills to reduce the risks that were around childbirth, so we just all labored, we learned skills to cope better because Lamaze and Bradley weren't skills that were good enough, and they were focused on low-risk normal birth. And the Birthing Better families I worked with, it was everybody. So we had to have skills that were adaptable as human beings, everybody. So what we found when we were working through this first 10 years, and the body skills in lesson 2, we started working with in the 80s, because what we discovered were two things. One is that even though we coped better, we had these long first and second stages. That's why the body skills were really, really important. The other thing was we had to understand what contractions were. And this was transformative because even today you'll hear this from women. When my labor started, the contractions weren't painful at all. I just went about my daily business and did whatever I want. Every once in a while, I'd feel a contraction. Wasn't painful, didn't almost feel it, but I knew I was having contraction compared to just the Braxton Hicks. And they were really clear, but yeah, it wasn't much. They wouldn't have needed breathing skills. But Birthing Better families, actually, they are using their breathing skills very, very early on, even before labor starts, because they're practicing to the Braxton Hicks contractions. But we're going to just put that aside for a minute. So then you hear women go, yeah, well, then the contractions became more defined, and I could feel them more. They were a little bit more intense, but not too much. They were okay. They were manageable. I could manage them, right? And these are women who lack skills. They're telling you that. They could manage them, right? So that whatever they were doing in their head, they were managing them. Then they'll say, the contractions got more painful. And I started to really struggle with coping. Okay? And manage and coping are slightly different words, aren't they? Right? So manage is you're doing something active. Coping is almost you're really doing something passive. You're just getting through it. And then what will happen is the contractions started to get really painful, and I started to really struggle with them. So listen to that verb, struggle. You can say any other words you want, but you know what I'm saying. So then it gets really painful. I couldn't cope any longer. I felt totally out of control. I was just totally overwhelmed. Now, how does breathing change when we have women do that? Well, at the beginning, when the contractions are nothing burgers, They're just breathing normally, whatever they are, usually nose, nose. When they're coping, often you'll hear them breathing a little bit more deeply. Sometimes they'll close their eyes because that's a concentration. When they're saying, I wasn't coping as well, then you start to hear women do that. When they start to say, it gets really painful and I'm not coping well, this is what you start to hear. Oh, okay. When women are saying, I'm feeling out of control, this is what you're hearing. Oh, oh, or, ah, or they just shut up. Oh, right. So that's what you hear. We don't often hear births. And the idea that before modern culture, we all were going to births, it's nonsense. That isn't accurate. And I don't want to go into that now. That's not accurate. Okay. And it's not accurate because not all women birthed where they lived. So we didn't often see births. Sometimes we did, but we didn't often see lots of them. So we didn't see any variations on them. So we were dealing with, well, what's that progression mean? So we stuck to the word contraction. So the contractions weren't painful. So as they got more painful, they got more defined. And what men discovered, and this is why you have to understand, men created half of these skills. We can't divide them and say men created these, women created these. Men created a lot of the body skills because to them it was an exercise in plumbing. Got to get a big object out of the container. How do I open the container? So that's what I did in lesson 2, and this is on a playlist in YouTube. So we have a Birthing Better one channel. We also have some Birthing Better channel that has one video, but we have 388 videos in our other Birthing Better YouTube channel. And this is the COVID-free course where these videos go into. It's a public playlist. So what guys heard was the contraction started, it went up, it peaked, it went away, and then it stopped. So what we did was to develop skills around the 5 phases of contractions. And this absolutely transformed how we could use skills. Transformed it. Instead of going, they were copable, I was having trouble, I struggled, I didn't manage, what we could say was, I could set my skills, particularly the breathing skills, at the beginning. I started to use effective breathing at the beginning of contractions. In phase 2, as it grew in intensity, I doubled down on my breathing skills. Often we'd lose it for that 10 to 15 seconds at the peak, but as we were coming down, we could use our breathing skills, and we could use our breathing skills in the space in between. And fathers could hear that change and help us regulate it. So in that very intense contraction, way over here, when the contraction would start, we'd set our breathing skills. We'd often breathe in the nose and out the nose. And we often didn't have more than one breath in and out the nose before the contraction, phase 2 started. So we would either continue to do that, and some women are even quieter, and then we'd change out the mouth. Oh. Oh. And then you can almost hear it peak. Oh. Oh. And you can almost hear it as a groan, almost hear it as discomfort. But when people hear that, they also think, is she having sex? Right? Because it's so close. When we went through the variations in the nose, out the mouth, sex is one of them. Ah, pain is one of them. Ah, it is so close. That's phase 3, coming down. Ah, ah, ah. Then there's, Lamaze did a wonderful thing, cleansing breath. And then we tried to go back to nose to nose. And because men, our birth coach could hear that, they could breathe with us effectively and help us stay the course, help us get rid of that contraction through the cleansing breath and set ourselves up for calming ourselves in between contractions. And we can do that for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, because we aren't wasting our energy and we let the past go. We don't think about the future. We calm ourselves. We are stimulating that parasympathetic nervous system. Our blood vessels are dilating. Our baby is safer. Our heart is safer. Our well-being is safer. So our breathing skills were very, very, very important. So we've gone through the 4 patterns: in the nose, out the nose, in the nose, out the mouth, in the mouth, out the nose, in and out the mouth. We've gone through the variations, and we've found the variations within the patterns of in the nose, out the nose, and in the nose, out the mouth, which we can use to calm ourselves and cope. We can hear when we're not coping or managing, and our birth coach can hear that and help us, because they breathe the same way. So they feel it in their body, hear it in their body, and can help us by using their body to align with us. This is what's called teamwork. It's called working together. This is what builds families. This is what strengthens families. And we did this whether we were driving to the hospital, being prepped, having surgery. We did it after birth if we had discomfort. We did it if we were breastfeeding and had discomfort. We did it if we were feeling anxious as parenting and we were feeling uncomfortable. We use our breathing effectively to calm ourselves. It was very important to do that. We've also gone through the 5 phases of contractions. And we have learned that if you break a contraction up into 5 phases, they're easier to cope with and they're easier to manage with. We're not stuck with a belief that they're either easy contractions or they're off the scale painful. If we lack skills, that's how we perceive them. If we have skills and we break it up into 5 phases, then we absolutely know that if we don't set our skill, then maybe we'll lose it in phase 1, 2, and 3. But then if we remember as it's coming down to gain control again, we'll gain control. Now, I want to tell you a story of a family who learned birthing better. They were having their first baby quite late in life. They worked together through the skills. And this is a story of a father and a mother, okay? She was breathing beautifully. That's what he saw. That's what he heard. She was coping well. That's what he told me. She was breathing beautifully. What she told me was, after the birth, they were talking together, but they each had their own story because she's doing it and he's watching her and hearing her do it. So he told me she was breathing beautifully. So he was attentive, but he was just there with her. She didn't look like she needed any help. She said, I was breathing beautifully. At the beginning of the contractions, I always set my breathing. I knew I was going to breathe in my nose, out my nose, and then it would move into nose and out my mouth, breathing beautifully. And she said I could manage. I could absolutely manage. And then she said to me, and then I figured the breathing doesn't make a difference. So at the next contraction, I'm just going to see what happens if I don't bother to set my breathing. She didn't say that out loud. He didn't know what was happening. So from one contraction of focusing beautifully, the next contraction, what he saw was an out of control woman, right? That quickly. He didn't know that she had decided, I'm not going to set my breathing. He didn't know at that point that when she didn't, the pain was so over the top to her that she just lost the plot. Okay? He didn't know that. What he saw, what he heard, was like a switch flipped. He had these skills. They had gone through these skills. They had practiced these skills. And he knew what his job was, which was to help her cope. So he just started to breathe in her ear. He could see those 5 phases of contractions. So he modified his breathing to those 5 phases as though he was doing that. So then what did she say to me? She said to me, he started breathing for me. She said, what scared me was it took me 5 contractions to even listen to him, to even start to feel I could get this back. He didn't know any of this was going through her mind. He just knew what his job was, and he had the skills to do the job, and he committed to helping her stay in control. 5 contractions. 5 contractions. That means a minute long at least, 3 minutes, a minute, 3 minutes, a minute, 3 minutes, a minute, 3 minutes, a minute, 3 minutes, before he even saw her begin to start to use the skills. He never varied. What did she say afterwards? I couldn't have done it without him. I was so grateful we had practiced those skills. I was so thankful that he immediately stepped in. I trust him. I trust him. He will be there for me. He will be there for me if I have trouble with the baby. He will be there for me in our relationship. He will be there for me. He wants to work with me. He wants to solve problems with me. He wants to use skills with me that we know we have. This is what her feelings were after the birth. What was this man's feelings? I helped her. She'd lost it. I helped her. I could help her. I helped her. I never varied. I stayed there. I helped her. I helped her. I helped her. I wanted her to know I would be there for her, that I would help her, that I would help her. I will always help her. I will always be there for her. I will always help her. What does this do for a partnership? What does this do for a family? What does this do for a mother? What does this do for a father? What does this do for our society? We need to grow a self-learning, skilled birthing population. We must do this. It is absolutely essential, particularly in this period of COVID-19. Women are being told, you can't have anybody to support you, so you need to have these skills for yourself. Go to my story in the course, in the COVID course that we're offering. My birth story, I birthed by myself in some strange hospital with an 8-week premature baby. I doubled down and used those skills. And everybody complimented me. Of course they're going to compliment you. Just in the 1970s when I gave birth, even with Lamaze, we were at least using skills, and obstetricians and labor and delivery nurses across the United States saw multiple millions of skilled birthing women and skilled birthing dads. Multiple millions. That's why you have so many choices, because we behaved. That didn't mean we were good little girls. That means we coped, we managed, we dealt with, we worked through, we handled, we stayed on top of, and we didn't suffer. They weren't the best skills. Birthing better is a huge evolution of those skills. And we now can really effectively use skills to do this activity of birthing our baby. But it takes you who have been listening to this to tell your friends and relatives you must become skilled. Do we care if you use birthing better skills? We'd like you to, but we don't care. There are lots of skills-based methods. You just need to become skilled. It needs to be a priority, not a secondary, I'll learn a little breathing. You need to work through this activity of birthing your baby, and you have to do it with your partner because you are building your family. Now, this is coming up to an hour, so I want to tell you something about the dads who did this. We're all human beings. We all have the same bones. We all breathe in our nose, out our nose. We're all just one human being. In modern cultures, we're often in a nuclear family. And let me tell you a story about a couple wanted to get pregnant. They went out, got pregnant, beautiful place. And within 3 weeks, she was vomiting. She didn't want to be touched. The guy's sitting there going, what the hell happened, right? And then Pregnancy just sweeps along. Women feel out of control once they're pregnant. They're taken over by this alien called their baby. Birth is the same way. Parenting, if it's your first baby, it's like that. But it's a thing, right? Well, where are men in this? They're just left behind. So what we learned was you had to start preparing your body at 24 weeks, do the internal work to prepare the birth canal, starting at 32 weeks, use the skills in birth. But what Dad said at 24 weeks is, we are already left behind. And think about this. You've been pregnant 6 months at 24 weeks. It has only been the last few weeks you've even felt your baby flicker. But at 24 weeks, your baby's big enough for you to really feel it move, and you're more than halfway through your pregnancy. Birth is right there in front of you. So pregnancy is that long. Birth is that long. You want to use the time in pregnancy from 24 weeks when you're thinking about a birth to prepare your body, learn the birth skills, and then use those skills at every single second in the birth so that you can work through this activity. So fathers were saying, we're already left behind in 24 weeks. So dads developed 10 skills for the 5 phases of pregnancy. Who knew there were 5 phases of pregnancy? From conception to 12 weeks to 24, 24 to 36, 36 to birth, and birth. You are still pregnant during your birth. You're not pregnant once your baby is out of your body. So those skills were simple skills. Patience, attention to detail, seeing what needs to be done and doing it, second set of eyes, second set of arms, humor, things like that. And they had to use the skills for themselves, to their baby, and to the baby's mother. So, for example, that couple that went off someplace and got pregnant and then she's vomiting, she vomits a few times a day for the next until 12 to 14 weeks. She doesn't want to be touched physically while they used to have a great sexual relationship. Patience? Does that sound like a good skill to have at the time? Patience with the woman. Patience with yourself. Patience to your baby. Because you made this baby, but you're not going to feel this baby. You're not going to feel it at 12 weeks. You can't even find her uterus at 12 weeks. It's still behind the pubic bone. So if you had patience, what about humor? It doesn't mean you're laughing at her being sick. It means you do something that lightens up the situation, that she can be grateful for. Now, those skills are not on our birthingbetter.org website. And where can you find them? You find them in the Udemy platform, udemy.com. They're a fathers-to-be and a mothers-to-be pregnancy academy. So if you're really bold and brave and want to become fully skilled through pregnancy, preparing for birth, in birth, so that you could move through and have a continuity of self through these aspects of your life and into parenting, then we suggest you take at least the course that is appropriate for your phase of pregnancy, and then start working through the Birthing Better skills. We've put together this COVID-19 course because this is a time where we can now develop a childbirth trend which is based primarily on being skilled, because we know choices are fickle. First of all, many women don't have the choices they want. Often women choose things that they really couldn't have cared about, and nobody knows what they really want, and choices change. We have put much too much emphasis on choices around pregnancy, around childbirth, We have put no emphasis. We've de-skilled our whole generations. This is unconscionable as far as we're concerned. So this is the end of the 3rd lesson of this COVID-free Birth Skills online course. Thank you very much for listening. Please share it on other social media sites so that people can hear this old lady rant. After 50 years, you bet I'm ranting, because we had an opportunity when I gave birth to continue to grow a skilled birthing population. And yes, it was the natural birth movement that actively de-skilled us by replacing skills with choices. Yes, they should have said skills and choices go hand in hand, but rely on skills because that's what's going to help you cope. So, for all of you natural birth advocates, please understand the intention is to include everybody to be a skilled birthing mother and a skilled birth coaching father or other person. See you tomorrow in the fourth class.